Hi, and welcome to Scoop and Scale, a podcast where we dish up and weigh out the facts about mostly equine nutrition. I'm veteran equine editor and content strategist Michelle Anderson, owner of Cadence Marketing and Media.
Hi, and I'm Dr. Claire Tunis, equine nutrition consultant and owner of Clarity Equine Nutrition.
Today, we're going to be talking about feeding horses alfalfa. But before we dive in, and because this is our first episode, we should probably tell everyone who we are, why we're here, and why we hope all of you become a part of our conversation.
That seems like a good place to start.
But I'm a dressage rider. I'm a trail rider. I'm a horse owner who keeps my horses at home. I've had horses my entire life.
Dare I ask how long that is?
About as long as yours.
Good answer.
I also worked as a horse magazine editor and writer for nearly 25 years and currently provide equine marketing, consulting, and content strategy and custom publishing to equine-related clients.
And I'm a pony club mom. I'm a dressage enthusiast and rider, kind of wannabe eventer. That was kind of gone older and I don't bounce as well anymore. So I just live vicariously through my eventing clients. But I do enjoy riding dressage. And I operate Clarity Equine Nutrition, which is a nutrition consulting company. And I work with horse owners, veterinarians, and do some consulting for some select businesses as well.
So Dr. Tunis, can I go ahead and call you Claire?
Please do.
Claire and I have known and worked with each other since 2014. I was a digital managing editor of a popular equine health website for just over a decade. While I was there, Claire wrote and I edited nearly 300 equine nutrition-related articles for weekly newsletters and other digital products that we created. We also did several live events and podcasts together.
Yeah, those were a ton of fun, and we were always limited to an hour, and we always had so much more to talk about than the scheduled time that we have. And we also always ended up talking about our own personal horses.
Now, as we both have an affinity for naughty, round chestnuts that need to eat less.
Yes, that's true. Mine was a little bit like a giraffe right now. He's growing spots. But we often talked about equine nutrition and other interesting research. So now we're turning those conversations into this podcast.
We're going to talk about nutrition topics, of course. That's Claire's area of expertise. But we also want to talk about topics that we know horse owners and veterinarians want to learn about.
I'm going to use this podcast as an excuse to have fabulous conversation with veterinarians and other equine scientists that we know to learn about their research and help them share that with the everyday horse owner.
Yeah, and for me, it's really about showcasing things that make horses' lives better.
Yeah, I think that's something we're both passionate about.
Yeah, for sure. And we hope that that's something that you share with us and that you will join us for a ride. So with that, we're going to dive in and talk about our first topic, which is alfalfa. So we're going to start with trivia time. Claire, alfalfa is a legume, not a grass. What's the difference?
Yeah, great question, right? Because so often we just refer to them as hay or alfalfa hay or grass hay. But yes, they are different. Alfalfa is a legume. That means that it fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere and stores that nitrogen in these little lumpy nodules on their roots called rhizomes. And so legume plants tend to be higher in nitrogen than, say, like a grass hay plant. So, alfalfa typically is higher in nitrogen. It's also higher in calcium than most grass hays. That would be true of other legumes as well, right? So we've got some other legumes, for example, like clover and peanut hay. Yeah, those are legumes as well. And I've never run into peanut hay down here in the Southwest, but I know that there are regions of the country where it's quite popular. Clover is also popular in some of the other, some areas of the country as well. So some of you may be running into other types of legumes other than alfalfa.
So when I think of alfalfa, feeding dairy cows comes to mind. My family, I come from dairy farmers, and so they had cows, dairy cows, and the horses ate alfalfa, and that just through the generations. We fed a lot of alfalfa. Alfalfa is so rich, and it is what helps produce really delicious milk. But is it good for those horses? And should my family have fed alfalfa for all those years?
Well, it's funny. It turns out we have something else in common because my grandfather on my mother's side was a dairy farmer. So I grew up on the dairy farm multiple mornings a week when my parents were at work instead of going to preschool. So we have dairy farming in our roots as well. Yeah, I mean, it is a richer, hay than most grass hays, meaning, when I think about it in the context of alfalfa, it is higher in protein than most grass hays. It's also higher in calories per pound than most grass hays. Not much, but a little bit. And obviously the better the quality of the alfalfa, the higher the calorie content per pound. That can make it a little challenging if you've got easy keepers. We were talking about, easy keeper chestnuts earlier. It would be hard to feed them a lot of alfalfa because of the higher calorie content, and you'd find yourself restricting the total number of pounds of hay you were feeding per day because you'd be getting to their calorie content more quickly if you were relying exclusively on alfalfa than if you fed a slightly lower calorie content hay like a grass hay. That protein in it has to go somewhere, right? It's going to be well in excess of a mature horse's requirements. I think we have this misnomer that horses need a lot more protein than they do. I know people go to the feed store and buy commercial feeds based on protein content and are looking for, more protein and that kind of thing. Most mature horses do very well with a, crude protein content in their diet of about 10-12%. And obviously, alfalfas can be up in the 20% protein. I mean, we're typically what you're buying for horses isn't the best quality alfalfa that gets taken by our, dairy farmers who take the super high protein, super high quality. But even those lower, sort of nutritional value alfalfas that aren't quite making the cut for dairy cows, those are still 18, 20, low 20% protein. It's almost twice the crude protein the horses need. And that has to go somewhere. They can't store protein in excessive requirements. So, they're going to have to drink more water and excrete that in urine. They break it down into ammonia, and then the ammonia gets excreted as urea in urine. So it's not that it's too rich, but it does have to be, I'm not a big fan of feeding straight alfalfa. I'll be totally honest. My preference is to keep the alfalfa. If I'm going to feed alfalfa to a horse, I want to keep it, no more than about 25-30% of their total forage. And then I feel like you've hit a sweet spot, where you're getting the extra protein, you're getting the extra calcium, but you're not going overboard.
Oh, so I've always been under the impression that the horses that are getting alfalfa or more alfalfa than the other horses, their stalls are a little harder to clean. So is that, a real thing, or is that my imagination?
No, I think it's a real thing. I mean, I can walk into barns, down here in the sort of desert Southwest, Southern California and the like. There are a lot of barns that feed straight alfalfa because we grow alfalfa. It's makes it a little bit more affordable because it's local for us, right? We're not having to ship it as far, living in the desert in Arizona. If you want to feed Timothy, you're shipping it in from the Pacific Northwest or Colorado or the like. So that increases its cost, right? Significantly because you've got to pay for all that shipping expense. Whereas we're growing alfalfa. Actually, I live in Gilbert. It used to be the alfalfa capital growing of the world. We grew more alfalfa in Gilbert than anywhere else. And so we still have a fair amount here, although most of it sadly is developed at this point. And we can get 7-8 cuttings of alfalfa off a field in a year.
Yeah. Up here in Oregon, we don't get that many cuttings.
No. So that makes it generally more affordable, right? It's obviously, it's about $10 a bale more now than it was 18 months ago. So affordable is all relative, but, still it's more affordable than a lot of your grass hays would be. So the temptation is to feed a lot. And so in answer to your question, yes, I can go into a barn and I can smell how much alfalfa they're feeding because of the ammonia that's coming out of those stalls. And that actually has some health considerations with it, right? Because ammonia is a caustic gas. It's low, right? It's a heavy gas. And so we're often feeding our horses at ground level because we should be feeding them, with their heads down, because it's important for respiratory tract drainage for their heads to be down. It's also good for their backs to kind of stretch and have their heads down. But then if you've got a lot of ammonia in the stall, it's a heavy gas, and so their nostrils are now sort of ammonia of height. They're breathing in this caustic gas, which is potentially damaging to lung tissue. So, it's we don't think about that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're, obviously we're worried about our horses, but that's not good for humans either. They're cleaning those stalls or sharing the space in the barn with the horses.
Absolutely. And, it's going to cost you more money in bedding, because they're going to be urinating more. So, if you're somebody who's using, for example, absorbent bedding like shavings, you're going to have to use more of that to absorb all the extra urine. So it's going to cost you more in bedding, which again, also we're not very good at adding together our expenses. At least I don't know.
Shavings up here in the Northwest are 3 times the price this year that they were last year. And it has to do with a lot of things. Supply and the fires that we've had, but bedding has gotten extremely expensive.
So that's crazy, because I always think of you guys having all the trees.
Yeah, no, a lot of them burnt down, unfortunately. Yeah. And lumber mills are, closing, and so there's less access. So that is another topic I think we have a lot to talk about in the future, and respiratory health, and then also bedding and shaving and some economy saving, money saving ideas in the future for us to talk about. But back to alfalfa. So it's a high protein feed, not great for all horses. But one horses do benefit from having alfalfa as their primary forage.
As their primary forage?
I can back off primary. Which horses should maybe be getting some alfalfa?
Yeah, I like that question better. Okay. Just because, as I said before, I think I can't. It's a rare horse that I think needs to be on majority alfalfa. They are out there, right? But
and I just did a refeeding on a horse, and we used alfalfa as the primary for the refeeding protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. UC Davis's refeeding protocol, they did some research there and found that if you have a truly emaciated horse, that alfalfa actually is their hay of choice for refeeding that horse on. And it has a lot to do with the mineral profile, electrolyte profile in alfalfa hay. But in the majority of otherwise healthy horses, I tend to try and keep alfalfa to 25-30% at most. And the horses where I'm going to be adding that 25-30% of their forage as alfalfa are going to be perhaps horses that are harder keepers, right, who need some extra calories, because I'm going to get a few extra calories per pound beyond what I'll get from a grass hay. And when I can add calories from forage to a ration, that's always my preferred way to do it if I can, because horses are designed to eat for many, many hours per day. And I feel like it's important to honor their digestive tract anatomy and physiology with that long stem forage. Also really useful for horses that maybe they're in good weight, but they're lacking a little top line. The amino acid profile of the amino acid in the protein in alfalfa is a little better quality. So you're going to get a little bit more lysine from alfalfa than you would a grass hay. And lysine is what we call the first limiting amino acid. It's the one that's most commonly missing in the equine diet. And I do know some dressage trainers who anecdotally swear by the fact that if their horses in their dressage training program don't get a little bit of alfalfa, they struggle to maintain those horses' top lines. And I think that that's possibly why it's just improving the protein profile of the diet, especially, if you are feeding a lower quality protein grass hay, that can definitely make a difference. Other horses where it's really useful are horses that struggle with gastric ulcers, because that high calcium content I mentioned earlier, and combined with the higher protein, acts as a nice buffer in the stomach. And there was some research done at Texas A&M. Golly, seems like yesterday, but it was quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
It was 2007. And they looked at feeding. They had some, I think it was some colts coming into their colt starting program, and they fed them either alfalfa or Bermuda, and scoped them, and then the crossover study switched them over, and the horses that were fed alfalfa, their ulcers were less severe, and they had fewer ulcers than the horses that were fed the Bermuda hay. So, and again, there's several other research studies showing that that's because of the buffering capacity of alfalfa hay. So I think if you have a horse with a history of ulcers, or just a competition horse where you're worried about ulcers, right, or horses that have somewhat stressful lives, traveling a lot, showing a lot, in full training, not getting as much turnout, those would be horses where I'd be like, having a little alfalfa in the diet might be a nice insurance policy. And, it doesn't have to be hay, right?
Yeah. Well, so before I ride, I let my horses eat off a hay bag with some alfalfa in it. And I started doing that when I was trail riding, partly because the alfalfa is weed free, or maybe it's not weed free. I have to rethink that. But I always had this idea that I wasn't helping spread weeds into the forest with that. It must have been weed-free alfalfa that I had purchased, now that I think about it. But I started with that, and it seemed to help my trail horses so much that I started incorporating that into my dressage horses routine too. But she gets some alfalfa before we ride, and I think it makes a difference. I don't know if it's a horse owner placebo or not, but
no, I think it does. That was the take home from that research. The researcher's recommendation was actually, I think, for like an 1,100 pound to 1,300 pound horse, they recommended feeding about a pound of alfalfa before exercise, as to create that buffering effect, also to help create the fibrous mat in the stomach. And so it doesn't have to be hay. I mean, I certainly know there are barns where I have horses where I don't want to feed a whole flake of hay. I mean, like here where we have the big 100+ pound bales of alfalfa, most of the flakes on those bales are ranging 7+ pounds a flake. And there are some horses where you're like, well, I don't really want to feed 7 pounds per day. I just want to feed 3 or 4. And the reality of feeding half flakes, I mean, we all know feeding half flakes is kind of a bit of a, doesn't really work very well. And so for those horses, using pellets or cubes, and just feeding 2 or 3, 4 pounds of pellets or cubes is nice, because you can control the amount much more specifically. And as the horse owner, you could be the one setting it and putting it in like a little Ziploc bag for the barn to feed, or for you to feed, rather than, are the people doing the feeding, going to actually do a half flake, or is going to throw a whole flake over, and that kind of thing. So, cubes and pellets are useful, in those situations too.
And those are weed free.
They generally are, yes, because of the heat that's been used to create the pellet. It will kill off any weed seeds that might be in them. Yeah.
So what about horses that might have HYPP or other muscle diseases?
Yeah, HYPP, we're wanting to stay away from high potassium. And, alfalfa can be high in potassium. Quite honestly, though, most hays are high in potassium. So it's tricky. I mean, alfalfa is generally higher in potassium, but, finding low enough potassium hay can be a real challenge for people managing HYPP. You can soak hays, and potassium will leach out if you soak the hay for quite a long time, longer than you would if you were just trying to get rid of starch, sugar from your hay. I mean, typically if we're soaking hay to get rid of sugar, we're soaking it for sort of 30 to 60 minutes. If you want to start getting rid of other nutrients, you're looking at, several hours. So certainly if you're wanting to lower potassium in your horse's diet through sort of hay management, I would definitely recommend working with a nutritionist, because it can be tricky. There are commercial bagged feeds out there with sort of guaranteed low potassium. And so they might be the special case horse where I'm actually not feeding as much forage, and I'm feeding more commercial feed so that I can get the overall concentration of potassium in the diet to be lower. Even though that's not how I would approach the majority of horses. Like, there are those special cases where you have to approach them a little differently. And they might be one of those. But yeah, generally I probably wouldn't feed alfalfa to a horse with HYPP.
So a lot of us think that alfalfa might make our horses hot, or or give them more energy, which might be something that we want in certain disciplines. Is alfalfa going to do that, give them more energy?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of making horses hot thing is one of those, I mean, bit of sort of old wives' tales, right? In inverted commas. I mean, I've definitely had friends and clients who are pretty adamant they can tell if their horse gets alfalfa by accident, because they say their horses are, erratic or whatever the next day when they ride them, more spooky, lit up kind of thing. And I'm not going to tell them that's not the case. You know what I mean? I mean, I think we don't understand everything, right? We don't know everything. And there may be some horses that are sensitive to alfalfa that way. I once had one of my peers say that, she wondered whether or not, because of the high protein resulting in being broken down into ultimately like ammonia, you're going to have ammonia circulating in the bloodstream. And do these horses that get fed more alfalfa, that seem to react to alfalfa, are they sensitive to that, circulating in their bloodstream? And, we were just sort of shooting our ideas around, and I've never given it much thought beyond that, but it was sort of an interesting idea. Certainly, as I mentioned before, because it has more calories per pound, if you feed more alfalfa, you're going to be feeding your horse more calories. And if you feed them more calories, they've got more energy, and they potentially going to be hotter because they're just being fed more calories. And that might not be the alfalfa's fault so much as you just fed them more calories. They might react the same way if you fed them more calories from grass, hay, or whatever as well. But I definitely know there are some people that are pretty adamant their horses can't have alfalfa. And, I'm not, people know their horses. I think that's where we have to really, trust. I mean, I think you and I both can appreciate this, right? As horse owners, that there are times where we know our horses, we're around them all the time. So if somebody comes to me and just says, I cannot feed my horse alfalfa, it makes him loopy, okay.
Yeah. No. Well, I have a follow-up question on the calorie density of alfalfa, and back to our gastric ulcer horses, which you and I both dealt with quite a bit. So for our horses with gastric ulcers, typically you want this forage first diet and keep them chewing and not having long fasting periods. So you want lots of forage. So I tend to go to a lower quality hay to keep it in front of them, but then you have the benefit in the alfalfa of having the calcium and the buffering, but then they need less of it because it's more calorie dense. So how do you balance those two things when you're formulating a diet for a horse that's prone to gastric ulcers? I have one who she just routinely, that's her. She gets ulcers, the weather changes, and she's going to get ulcers. And she's I manage her very carefully.
Yeah. The other joy of the sensitive chestnuts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she is. That one is a chestnut. Yeah.
Yeah. You've talked about her before. Yeah, I mean, it is a trade-off, right? It's a balancing act. Again, for me, that's where I might use pellets, where I'm controlling more precisely and I can really accurately weigh it out, and do a little bit of, versus relying on, an alfalfa hay where perhaps I'm a little bit more sloppy with my measuring, or it isn't getting measured because, the people that are feeding don't measure it. They just peel a flake off and throw it over the door kind of thing. So I think that's where really measuring your feed, when you've got these weight management challenges, becomes really important. But I don't think it takes, it doesn't take a lot of alfalfa to get that buffering, effect. And, there are commercial products out there now that have strong buffering capacity, even actually shown to be, better buffers than alfalfa. They buffer more quickly and they buffer for longer than alfalfa does. I mean, obviously they're more expensive for a 50-pound bag of that than a 50-pound bag of alfalfa. So as always, it's a trade-off, right? But those are options out there too, and they're not particularly calorically dense. So, that would be the other way to go to if you really wanted the buffering capacity, is to find one of those products that's actually designed specifically for that purpose.
Yeah. Well, and with that mare in particular, it makes me think of what you said about knowing your horse and trusting the horse owner. And that horse, she's very hot. I mean, she has a lot of go in her. The alfalfa prior to eating actually makes her less reactive and less hot because I think it just settles her gut and she's more comfortable during work. So you never know. I wish they could just tell us, but.
Oh, absolutely. And I think actually you raised a really interesting point. I mean, a lot of people come to me wanting calming products, right? They want some calming supplement. And I've really come to, over the years I've been doing this, I think a lot of the behavioral things that we tend to reach for calming product actually stem from gastrointestinal distress. Mm-hmm. It is discomfort while they're under saddle. And if you think about, my trainer actually said to me recently, she said, the thing about gastric ulcer pain is you can't get away from it. Mm-hmm. We could, if you're a little bit off, like if you think about when you're walking, if you have a little pebble in your shoe, then you walk. I don't know about you, but I'm one of those people where I'm like, I don't want to stop and take my shoe off. I'm going to keep walking and I shall just walk more on my right foot and not on the left foot, which has the pebble in it, or I'll stand on my heel more and not break over onto the ball of my foot. Like you contort yourself, right, to avoid the pain of the pebble in your shoe. And you can do that to a certain extent and reduce the pain that you're experiencing. But when you have gastric ulcers, you can't contort yourself away from that. You can't get away from that pain. And it's the same if you've got discomfort, elsewhere in the gut too. If your, hindgut is disrupted and you're just feeling kind of bloated and, it's like I think we can all relate to feeling crummy, when we've got indigestion or a little bit bloated or acid reflux. Yeah, well, exactly. So, I do think that some of the hotness that we see in horses that we're so quick to try and fix with a calmer, may actually be GI related. And I think it's always, worth having a conversation with your veterinarian about whether you need to be looking for ulcers and other ways that you can support the horse's diet with different nutritional management or adding things that help support stability of the equine digestive tract. And I've certainly had clients that when we've done that, their horses have calmed down.
And sometimes it's even alfalfa that helps with that calming down.
Exactly, right? Despite its label of being hot and causing horses to be hot. So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And what about the risk of enteroliths and eating alfalfa?
Yeah, it seems to be more of a risk on the West Coast of the United States than in other areas. Our alfalfa on the West Coast tends to be pretty high in magnesium as well as calcium. And it seems to be that really causes the problems with enteroliths. So again, that's where part of the recommendation is of staying more at 25-30% of the total ration as alfalfa if you're going to feed alfalfa, and certainly no more than 50-50. Back when I feel like the enterolith data research was done back in the 80s. It was a long time ago now.
It was a long time ago.
And I know we kind of identified some breeds of horses that are more, Arabians were always labeled as the enterolith candidates. And so I am a little cautious, perhaps more cautious there. I don't know whether that would still be found to be true.
Yeah. I don't know. It's not something that I think about very often. And then occasionally I'm at my equine hospital and I see, they have them as book stops.
Yeah, door stops. They make great door stops. Yeah.
Bookends. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, those are really serious because they can be large stones, that develop and then require surgery.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether it's a piece of grit in the digestive tract, they're almost like pearls, right?
Yeah.
They just layer, that's true, right onto the, and create, some of them are massive. I can't even, can you imagine having that in your gut? And cantering and jumping and,
I know.
Or doing sliding stops and stuff. It's like literally they're the size of softballs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. They're pretty impressive when you see them. So, well, that was all the questions I had about alfalfa.
I think those are most of the questions people tend to have. So,
I think that just about covers all the questions that I think of when I'm thinking about alfalfa. But if anyone's listening and has any questions they'd like to send us or something that we didn't cover, you can send those questions to info@scoopandscale.com, and is spelled out. So again, that's info@scoopandscale.com. And so with that, we are done with our first podcast. How do you think it went?
I had a lot of fun. Yeah. I'm looking forward to doing this again sometime. And I think we just in that first podcast came up with lots of future topic ideas.
I think in the future, we're going to be talking about gastric ulcers. What were some of the others that
Respiratory health. Respiratory health.
Ammonia, saving some money and time in your barn chores. Yeah, there's lots of stuff coming up. I know I want to talk about bits and bit fit and mouth pain. And
yeah, for sure. And I think, if people listening have got burning topics they would like to know more about, we'd love to hear about those too.
I always learn something when we talk. I hope our audience has learned something too. If you're listening and you want to be a part of our conversation, you can send suggestions for future topics and equine nutrition topics to info@scoopandscale.com. You can find Claire at clarityequine.com. If you're interested in equine marketing or content services, I'm available at michelle@cadencemarketingllc.com. That's cadence, like what I'm trying to find with my young dressage horse.
Aren't we all?
All about rhythm and tempo. Right. For the Scoop and Scale podcast, I'm Michelle Anderson.
And I'm Dr. Claire Tunis.
Thanks for riding along with us.